Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltiziak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. Welcome to another episode. The NFL draft results are in, and we break down the Lions' picks in rounds 1 and 2, where they addressed arguably their two biggest needs on the roster. We'll also hit on some surprising moves around the league in the first round. Plus, we touch on rounds 4 through 7, discuss some of the insights shared by General Manager Brad Holmes. And if that isn't enough, we're also going to share our draft coverage takeaways and a few things we learned about the Lions' new approach. We'll get to that and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
Hi, this is Billy Sims, and you listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers, former Michigan High School Coach of the Year, also named Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He is the Scouting and Training Director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, what a weekend. I'm glad we're all getting together to talk about it.
Oh, my God. I knew it was going to be a great draft for us after we shattered the 60 Detroit Coney Islands at the draft party at my house, and you guys are a big part of that. So, 60 Conies, you know that the Lions were going to have a great weekend, and they did.
Well, that's impressive because it was 48 or so last year. So I didn't know that you didn't just eclipse it; you shattered it, as you said.
So we're shooting for 72 next year. So we'll start practicing.
All right. Well, joining Coach and I, of course, is the senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle, the sports writer of the year for Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated, James Cook. James, glad you could help impact that Coney Island record, and I can't wait to get your insights on all the stuff we saw this weekend.
Yeah, I hit the over. I got 4.
Ooh.
I've had 4 myself. So next year I'm going to have to just not eat it all during the day and try to beat that.
I look forward to seeing that take place. Well, before we get to next year, we got a whole lot going on, and we got to talk about this weekend. The Lions started the draft with 9 picks, did a little maneuvering, which we kind of thought they would, resulted in 2 fewer picks. So they made 7 selections. Let's start with your overall takeaway from the draft. 1 to 2, 3 sentences. What are you thinking? What's your overall takeaway, James?
I found this one website called draftgradebook.com, and I'm just hoping that they are right on the money because they gave the Detroit Lions the only A of any team that they did. They graded all 32 teams. The Lions were an A minus. Nobody got a straight A, and the Lions were the only team that got above a B. So I'm really hoping that they thought that all the picks, 4th round and on, were very good value, except they had Tyree West, not being drafted. But, Jerry and I had talked about him before, so we knew that the Lions were maybe going to go that way.
All right, Coach, how about you? What's your overall takeaway from the draft?
Basically, I see us drafting players that could potentially be starters for us, but excellent backup players. They did not draft anybody that had to develop, just guys that fit the mold of the hard hat and lunchbox. Guys that we can, maybe not plug and play, but a few tweaks here and there. I believe the top priority is develop competition and practice, right? Which will make us better on game days. Take care of the little things. Big things will take care of themselves. Back to how we started when this crew came in and how we are going to dominate this year.
All right. Well, I guess my overall takeaways are the Lions did what we hoped and wanted them to do with those first 2 picks. So I feel really good. And the draft coverage left a lot to be desired. And we will get into that later in the show. Very disappointed by the production quality of what we saw. Okay. Let's start with round 1, though. We were not disappointed. The Lions took offensive tackle Blake Miller out of Clemson at 17. Coach, what are your thoughts on this pick?
You take a guy who started 54 games in college. He missed 1 practice, and that was to have surgery, and he was back at the next practice. He was a wrestler. He's a guy that, the quotes, James read them to me when they first came out, but they just stuck with me. And he says, you get to go out and take someone's will on every play. You get to put them into the ground at the end of the game, you want to see them looking for the sideline. Okay. Watch film. You see that every clip when you watch film on him. And when you listen to what Dabble Sweeney has to say about him, this is going to be a great one for us.
Yeah, Brad's comments are they've been watching him for a while. They've been watching him for like 3 years, and they said he's gotten better every year, James. The thing they liked about him is he's got a high floor, but they've seen him get better every year. They think there's continued opportunity for growth, especially working with the offensive line that coach that they have. And it says you can sleep well at night when you know you got a guy like this. So some guys have a high ceiling, but the floor might not be as high. With this guy, they think they got the high floor, and there's still room to grow with the ceiling.
Yeah, I think they got an instant starter. Somebody who can come in and start on day one. SE plays the ACC schedule. Pretty good schedule. They do pretty decent in non-conference too. And Dabo just raved about the guy. Consistent, like Jerry said, never gets hurt. And just he's a very good pass blocker. Very a good run blocker too, but his pass blocking is just even better than his run blocking. So I think you'll see that, and he's just like Jerry said, he likes to be mean. You put him next to Ratledge, that's going to be fun to watch. Just trying to see guys to get through that.
Yeah, I mean Eric Schlitt had him rated up really high on his grit index, and so seems like a natural fit. The Lions agreed so because let's talk about how the first round unfolded. I mean, there were some surprise moves early on. There were no offensive tackles getting taken in the first like 6, 7, 8 picks, and so actually Spencer Fano went at 9. That was the first offensive tackle. So 8 picks in, you're like, hey, this is looking good. But then you start getting some guys going, and you're like, okay, well, who's going to be available? And so the Lions actually had some options here. It wasn't just Blake Miller. Monroe Freeling went a couple picks later. Now, that guy has not started nearly as many games as Blake Miller, and I think that might be the thing the Lions liked about him as well is how much experience he has playing. And people were wondering, would the Lions trade up? Should they trade back? Coach, as it was unfolding, what were you thinking? And what are your thoughts on the Lions drafting Miller right where he was and not taking Freeling or somebody else?
Yeah, and I had predicted that they were going to trade up to get Fano, but I also because I really liked him a ton. But it was also one of those things that if they didn't do that, it was going to sit. Then we had even talked about them trading back to get Blake Miller, and we got the nastiest offensive lineman in the draft that can play.
Yeah.
That's tough. That doesn't get hurt. Knock on wood. But so hope I mean I think it's just a great pick. Great pick.
Yeah, well, and the Lions said they didn't get many trades or calls about trading down. I think Brad Holmes said they actually got one, but he didn't elaborate on that or whatnot. And so the idea was, okay, Blake Miller, 17, okay, but if you could trade back and get Blake Miller and pick up another third or fourth round pick, that could be nice, James. But there's also, I mean, that's like, you want your cake and eat it too type thing. If the guy's there, there's always risk when you trade back. And so what are your thoughts on the Blake Miller pick and maybe over Monroe Freeling and or taking him at the 17 spot?
Yeah, well, I think the draft just kind of played exactly how Brad Holmes wanted it to. And so he was like, I don't need to trade up. Trading up to 9 was going to be too expensive, and that's where Fano went. So to move up from some 17 and 9 was going to require some serious draft capital that I don't think that Holmes was willing to part with. And then just the other tackles and even Vega going ahead of them, it was pretty good. And then trading down, I think now that you look at it, I think it was a pretty smart move because two of the teams that picked fairly soon after the Lions took tackles.
Yeah.
So maybe Miller might not have been there, depending on who traded up, and whether they would be willing to tell Holmes who it was they're trading for.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, 2 out of the next 3 picks were offensive tackles. And that's the other thing. I mean, again, ideal world, they could trade back and do that. But the Lions had a big need at tackle for this draft. And one of the guys that was, linked to them or thought to be a really good fit was sitting there for them to take. And you know how they say sometimes you get too cute, you get caught. And Well, guys, we know Brad Holmes in the past has shown to have a keen ability to read a draft board and kind of have a feel for where somebody might go. And there was no clear cut number one offensive tackle. Maybe there was one, but after that, it was like the next five guys all had a variation of things. And so the Lions got a guy that's going to be very capable of starting day one if he earns that spot. So, love the pick, and I'm very happy that they got him. So, Coach, any more thoughts on Miller before we move on?
Nope.
All right. Well, then let's talk about the surprise moves in the first round. All right. Mostly the ones probably that happened before the Lions picked. James, let's start with you. What surprised you in the first round?
Well, I mean, the Ty Simpson one is the obvious one, with the Rams taking a quarterback, and then the McVay's reaction in the press conference afterwards. He didn't seem to know that was going to happen and didn't seem too pleased with it. But I think at 12, with Caden Proctor going to the Dolphins, Holmes had to have been really happy when that happened
Mhm.
and that tackle went off the board before his guy that he wanted. So I think that kind of opened up the door to him just kind of staying there and waiting for Miller to fall to him.
Well, that's interesting. So two things on there. First, the McVay thing. I heard McVay's comments where he was trying to be respectful to Stafford with that reaction, but like they talked to Stafford ahead of time, which I don't know if Green Bay did that with Aaron Rodgers when they drafted Jordan Love, but they let Stafford know ahead of time. But I like you, I actually love that they made that pick because it means they didn't grab Kenyon Sadiq to add to that offense this year. What it looks like in the future, who knows? But the Proctor one's real interesting. And coach, a lot of people were wondering if Proctor was still on the board. They wanted to see what would the Lions do. There had been the link, but then people said there wasn't a fit. I'm just glad that Proctor went ahead of time and that pushed other guys down the board.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. And I think the Delane, the corner got picked, and then of course the quarterback that the Rams took, then you started seeing, and we talked about it as it was going, like, yeah, some good people are going to fall to us right now. You always get that. If you get that one or two, then that's when Brad Holmes probably said, well, I don't think we need to trade up, and we are going to grab at 17. So, James said it earlier. It fell the way we wanted it. That was for sure. It fell the way that Brad Holmes and the staff was looking for. So.
Yeah, and having two wide receivers go early helped as well versus just having one. So again, just push things down, and I think maybe some people were surprised that Arizona drafted Jeremiah Love, but they want a playmaker there, and they will probably try to build around him a lot. Okay, let's go to round two, guys. The Lions trade up from 50 to 44 with the Jets, giving up their second, fourth round pick. They took a defensive end. Not the one a lot of people might have thought they were going to take. Gabe Akas from Illinois. No, they took Derek Moore, defensive end from Michigan. And so Akas, from what I've read, from what I've found out, might be sturdier on the edge physically, while Moore has better length, and he's more of a prototypical NFL edge frame. And so I think what they're liking out of Moore is, well, there's a couple things. The first thing I'll say is, I think that ability to get pressure and get home, the Lions are trying to get some pressure on the quarterback and finish these things. Coach, what did you see about the defensive end moves, and what are your thoughts on this draft pick?
Yeah, I think, again, we go back to another guy that's violent. He's a violent football player, which fits, our MO, and he's got length. And I think they realize he's, pretty good run stopper. Will get better. And it's, again, I talked about those things where there's one or two little things they have to tweak that they know they can tweak in camp to make them do what they want them to do. So I think that was, the biggest reason they brought him up for that. And we'll see if, it holds true, but it should. He's pretty athletic, and, and he's not small, that's for sure. So.
Well, and it's interesting. The Lions had their choice of a few different defensive ends because Zion Young was there as well.
Yeah.
So just like in the first round when Miller went, there'll be some offensive tackles he gets compared to.
Yeah.
Moore's going to get compared. And, they asked about Brad Holmes' comments about trading up. And he said, he was our number one guy available at that point. And he goes, somebody else might have had him at 3 or 4. You don't know how it's all going to go. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Baltimore draft right after them?
They could.
And isn't their coach a former coach of Derek Moore? So that could have played into it.
No.
But James, what are your thoughts on the draft pick? And also, the Lions traded up where some people were thinking they could have stayed put based on where Akis went.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did trade up right in front of the Ravens, and then the Ravens, the pick afterwards, took Zion Young. So so they were thinking edge too. So yeah, I mean Young and Jacques were the two guys that I kind of really liked in that second round, but Moore, I think I'm I like that the Lions are kind of stepping out of their prototype that they have for a defensive end, and that not all defensive ends have to be 270 pounds. Uh, Moore's 255 though. He's got enough. I think he's got enough to hold up against the run if they need to be. And they went and got another guy later in the draft that they can play at defensive end on rundowns if they want to. So they could just platoon these two guys kind of if they wanted to. So I like the pick. I think Moore's got a little bit more. I think he's got a little bit better speed than say Jacques. He's not as big and not as dominant of a run guy, I think. But I like the pick, and it's interesting that two of their first three picks were Michigan guys after they canceled their local pro day.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe throwing some smoke into that screen there just to, not let people tip their hand.
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't know if I know we talked about this off air, but another interesting thing is you know what type of player you're getting from that program. I think Brad Holmes specifically targets certain schools because then he knows. Yeah, I think he even said the learning curve is that much smaller. There's always a rookie learning curve, but when you get a guy from a certain program, and that probably lends itself into the very next pick the Lions take, is you already know they've got a lot of stuff figured out, coach. There's always a jump to the next level, but when you get somebody from the previous level that's worked in a system that is well developed, it shrinks that learning curve and it probably increases the chances of you actually hitting on that player versus it not working out.
Yeah. And, you look at Iowa, we were talking about that last night. Iowa never wins the Big Ten. But man, when they're good, the guys that go in the NFL tear it up. So, the Alabamas, the Georgias. I mean, they're all the Notre Dame. I mean, we can, you name those blue blood programs, and if you got somebody in there and you look at them and go, yeah, you know what, we think we can, because their work ethics, they have to work harder. They got a lot. Not that they have to work harder, but they're pushed harder in those situations because they have to uphold their bragging rights, of what they have.
That makes a lot of sense. And James, this wasn't the first time Moore's been around the draft. He was at the draft a couple years ago.
Yeah, he was. I think it was day three because it was daylight out. So you might have actually seen this when he came up on stage at the draft in Detroit and had the national championship trophy and was parading that around. So he's been up on that stage already before.
Awesome. And he won't have to go very far to go to Ford Field to go to Allen Park. So well, we wanted to say a thank you to our friends at Cherry Republic for sponsoring the podcast. They're a Michigan-made goodness straight from Traverse City, Michigan. Whether it's game day, picnic, or a gift, they've got you covered with snacks and more. Head over to cherryrepublic.com and check them out. All right, guys, the Lions did not draft anybody in the third. They stayed defense in the fourth, 117th. They went with Jimmy Rolder, another University of Michigan player, a linebacker. This may have surprised some people, but it was the thinnest area on the roster with the least number of players on there, having lost a handful. So, James, what's your takeaway with this move?
I think it's a good depth spot to a spot that needed some more depth. So I mean, he's a very sure tackler. That's been the one thing he's done in the last couple years at Michigan, is that he just doesn't miss tackles. He's got some coverage ability, and he's a nice insurance policy in case for some reason, and I don't think this is going to happen. They can't come to an agreement with Jack Campbell. They're weighing whether to exercise his fifth year option now. Rolder is supposed to be somebody who can play kind of all over at linebacker. So, I mean, that's a great guy to have as backup, but he could also move into the middle if you're playing, a little 3-4 or, God forbid, you need to replace Jack Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brad Holmes said the first time he looked at Rolder, he just kept saying football player, football player. That's coach's love language right there.
Mhm.
And he said he has just seen him get better. He's been watching him for a long time. And so, uh, having a guy that's big and explosive like that as an inside linebacker, um, coach, it's one more guy to add to the depth chart who will work his way up as well. And, I'm excited about it that they went there and got a guy this early on defense just to bolster that area. What's your impression?
Yeah, I mean he's a downhill football player. I mean that's the biggest thing about him. And again, he's getting to the ball carrier and he's trying to punish him and he's trying to make sure he feels every hit. So, I thought there was a couple linebackers, that we wanted. Really love the Pitt guy, just because of his number. Plus, he came from, Narduzzi's defense, which is, which is an NFL defense. And so, but again, the Lions picked him. He's got to be good. I mean, that's our, I don't question it too much. And, he's got, he'll learn from that linebacking coach we have, and Shep knows what he wants, and so that's should be a good move for us.
All right. Well, the Lions had two picks in the fifth round. The first one was Keith Abney, the second defensive back out of Arizona State. And Brad Holmes kind of was like, man, same thing. They evaluated him multiple times. They think he tilts a little bit more towards nickel than the outside. But also, if I'm not mistaken, they thought he was going to go a round or two
Yeah.
earlier. So when they saw him there, James, they just swooped in and grabbed him.
Yeah, he's somebody that I never really talked about when we were talking about looking ahead of the draft because I thought he was going to go in the third round. The Lions don't have a third round pick. So I just he's a great pick, and he's somebody that I liked and had taken in some mock drafts where I did move around and picked up a third round pick or things like that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people had him pegged as a third rounder, fourth at the latest. But kind of corners did slip a little bit in this draft after the first round. But I think he's going to come in. He's going to compete with McCreary right away for the nickel job. He's a leader. He's durable. He's good in run support. He plays bigger than he is. I think he's 5'10", but in run support he plays bigger than that. A lot of ways reminds you of Amik Robertson, just a younger version of Amik Robertson. And the weird thing with him is he was a competitive inline speed skater
So,
Awesome.
rollerblade, wasn't it?
as a younger guy. What?
Wasn't it rollerblades? Or
Yeah,
was it?
rollerblades. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, inline skate. Yeah.
yes.
He held the national 300-meter record in 2017. But then during the pandemic, all the facilities for these things were closed down, so he shut that down and started focusing on football.
All right. Well, coach, what do you like about this? I mean, one more guy. I mean, the Lions have really brought in a ton of guys now to the secondary room for the defensive back room. What are your thoughts on getting a guy like Abney in the fifth round?
Yeah, I think he's another one of those guys. He's going to be a special team guy. He will put his, he'll put his face mask on a helmet or on a chest plate. Yeah, he's 5'10", like you said, 187. He ran a 4.45. Okay. Bench 15 was pretty decent. His short shuttle was a 4.38. Not a great time, so it probably slipped. His three cone was a 6.91. Again, those numbers are, that may be why people saw that and said, maybe he's not worth a third. But watch his tape. He's definitely worth where we got him. And you watch his tape. I mean, that dude, he's a ball hawk. He's got great hands. He loves to hit you. And I'm telling you, if you're a big tight end, you better get your thigh pads very thick because he is going to take your thigh pad out.
All right. Well, it sounds like the Lions have a hitter and a guy that's going to contribute well in the second. It's just, I think that's the theme I'm seeing is they got value late in this draft. And I think that's the exciting thing. The next guy they got was Kendrick Law, wide receiver. They actually traded up to get him at 168. Um, you know, Initially, I think Brad Holmes said the low hanging fruit is you see him to be a Khalif Raymond replacement,
Mhm.
but he can do multiple roles. And he also thinks it's not just a gadget player, but this guy, I mean, he can do some special team stuff. He can be a gunner. And so, Coach, what are you thinking about picking up Kendrick Law here from, was it
Another one of
Kentucky?
those. What number wasn't he at Alabama?
Kentucky. He may have been at Alabama before that, right?
Okay, now I'm good.
Yes.
That's where I'm leading. I'm walking you right into it. Okay. So they saw him in the Georgia Alabama game. The general Ray Agnew,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they were at the
Did
Alabama
that, yeah.
Georgia game. They saw him, they took notes on him, and then he ended up transferring to Kentucky. I made a thing and said, great story about the Lions doing their homework. A great story. They saw him at a game, wrote it down. The transfer portal almost made us forget about him because he wasn't at Alabama next year. So I want to hand clap for the scouting department and stuff because they are chasing dudes from college to college to college instead of saying, hey, that number one from Alabama, we got to look at him. So, but again, saw him in 24, found him in 25, stole him in the draft in 26, helping us get to the Super Bowl 26, 27. Just saying, just saying. So,
Since you brought up numbers, I saw a thing on social media.
mm-hmm.
What was Jameer Gibbs' number at Alabama?
One,
What was JMO's number at Alabama?
one. What
Right?
was his
So
number?
one.
One.
There you go. So I don't know. Somebody brought up somebody else who could be the next number one, but it's another wide receiver. So I don't know about that. But this is a guy, James, that could fit a lot of different roles for the Lions, and they got him late in the fifth round.
Yeah, he's a very interesting player. And like you said, he can do a lot of things. He seems just really good. Somebody set for return duties. Just you put the ball in his hands and he's dangerous, and give him any space and he's dangerous. He's also like Holmes said, people are going to say he could be a gadget player. Part of that is because 95 or 93.5% of his receiving yards came after the catch. So he is
Wow.
a guy that you
Yeah.
throw short passes to, and he makes things happen. And things like reverses, jet sweeps, the stuff that you've seen them like to do with players like Khalif Raymond and Jamo and on all those. So those are things that he can do as well. I can definitely see him. He looks like pretty physical for his size, so I could see him being a gunner type player too on special teams, not just return stuff. So I think he can do a little bit of everything. And I think he does kind of replace Lee Freeman. Maybe not right this year because they got Greg Dortch, I think, who kind of does that too. But now you got Dortch, you've got Law, you've got Lovett, all competing to be who can be the next Khalif Raymond. So that's going to be a good one to watch there. So the only thing that's concerning, I think, about him is that his stats are not great. But neither were Isaac Taslaw's. He didn't. Law didn't even have 900 career yards in college. He only scored 4 touchdowns. But you got Law and Taslaw now.
Yes, you do. And you know what? I think you said it right, though. You've got Dortch, you've got Law, and you've got Lovett all competing with each other. And that's going to be the great thing. You've got some competition in there, and that's going to elevate. And it does make me think, this could mean if Law can do what they want him to do, then Dortch might he signed a 1 year deal. So it might be 1 year that he's here if you can have somebody else on a rookie contract. But again, you got to see who wins the job and how things go in camp.
Well, this also goes back to last year when how many times did you, Matt, say, oh, I wish we had two really fast returners, on the kick.
Because we were struggling on the return
Yes.
game and they kept kicking it to one
Yep.
guy.
Yep. And now we're bringing all these guys in. And Dortch is probably that receiver guy that's going to see more reps there because of all the time he's had in the league already. Where these two younger guys are going to say, all right, you want to make this squad? Let's be a gunner. Let's return kicks. So yeah, again, competition breeds winners.
Yeah, and I love that perspective, Coach. You're exactly right. That could really help having multiple, guys back there who might have a gear that Mr. Old Reliable doesn't have, but he was getting the job done when nobody else could last year. We've got a lot of new guys coming in. That's exciting.
Indeed.
Okay, last two picks of the draft, both defensive tackles,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Skylar Gill-Howard in the sixth and Tyree West in the seventh. And so a lot to kind of like about these guys, even though we got them so late. James, what are your thoughts?
The great story about Gil Howard is about his draft party that he had, where he didn't have any hats. At the last minute, he realized he didn't have any hats available for when he got picked, and his grandfather came to the draft party and is a Lions fan and had a Lions hat for him. So that was the only hat that he had available, and then he gets picked by the Detroit Lions. Uh,
Destiny.
that just seems like it, right? His 2025 season ended early with a fairly severe ankle injury. I think it was possibly even broken. I think he got kind of like one of those leg whip things or whatever. But apparently there was some reports that there was a chance for him to come back at the end of the season. So I think with the timeline, I don't know that there's a giant worry about that. But it might have made him slip in the draft with some GMs because he was supposed to get picked way higher than this. I mean, he's a sixth round pick, and so he was supposed to go like in the fourth with a lot of people.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember who was it? Which player was it? Was it Skyler? I think it was Skyler who worked at FedEx. Am
Mhm.
I remembering this right?
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep.
Coach, do you have that story?
It's FedEx. He used FedEx to put himself through school. He walked on at NIU, if that's correct. NIU, Northern, I think it was NIU. He walked on where he finally earned a scholarship when he went to, it moved up into the uh, Division One, the Power Four level. Uh, his story, he's only 6 foot, 280 pounds, but he's got athleticism and quickness. But his story to get to where he's at, why he's here today, is he going to not keep working to
Right.
get better than where he has been? Or is he saying, I made it? No, absolutely not. Great pick. I think, again, another one of those guys that's going to come into camp and he's been through it all. He's been through a mess and he's continues to not let life knock him down. So this is a good one. I think this is going to be a fun one for us.
Yeah, when I saw that story, I sent it to you right away because I was
Yeah.
like, this is coach's kind of guy, and someone who's had to work and fight to earn everything is a person who doesn't stop, and they
Mhm.
usually tend to be the overachiever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And then, yeah, having two guys in here, him and Tyree West, James, that is encouraging because it gives you more depth behind the middle section because we did lose Roy Lopez, we did lose DJ Reader.
Mhm.
So that'll be good to have there.
Yeah, I've heard talk that DJ Reader is going to sign with the Giants. Or it's trending that way at least. So it looks like
Yeah.
they're gonna lose him. But yeah, Tyree West is an interesting guy too. A versatile defensive lineman who played as more kind of the pass rush defensive tackle, run stopping big defensive end kind of guy. So his only other top 30 visit that he had was with the New York Jets and Aaron Glenn, uh, other than the Detroit Lions. So that's interesting. His profile is a lot like Josh Pascal,
Mhm.
or even and Gil Howard is kind of a little bit like Levi, where he's that good kind of three technique who could also, if you needed him to, slide out and play end, when you want a big end. So they got some pretty good versatility. They got some guys who can rush the passer, but aren't bad against the run or anything. And West is a guy who I could see you just sub packaging him in a variety of different roles, including maybe as that Davenport big end
Mhm.
that the Lions like to have at least some of the time on the field.
All right, Coach, how are you seeing this pick?
Hey, if AG talked to him, we got to take him. I'm sorry. No, and again, the same thing. Big 6'3", 290. I like, his junior year, I watched him because everybody was talking about how great the defensive tackles were at Tennessee. And then I'm like, God, those guys are pretty. I thought they were soft, but then I watched some games on him this year, and you can see that raised his level. His split is 10, his 10 yard split in the combine was 168, which at 6'3", 290, I think is pretty decent. He can get off the ball pretty well. So, again, I think we found another one, another one of those guys that's going to push the table and going to push the D line room, whether it's at D end or big tackle.
All right. Well, that's it. That's the draft. So before we talk about the undrafted free agents, let's talk about who the Lions did not draft. They did not draft a safety. They did not draft a tight end. They did not draft a running back. And I thought they would draft a tight end and a running back.
Mhm.
And hindsight can be 2020. I thought about it more. Now I understand why they didn't draft a tight end. I know they brought at least one, if not two, in as an undrafted free agent. But if you drafted one, you're committing to keeping four tight ends on your roster, likely. And we know you've got Laporta, Wright, and Conklin. And those three guys are going to be on your roster. So even though all of their contracts are up after this year, as it stands, they could always get extended. Um, Next year probably makes more sense, I guess. Unless, again, you were going to be committed to keeping four, but then that also affects your roster makeup. So I can see why they didn't go for it there with the draft pick. That makes a lot of sense. Um, Running back and safety. Well, Brad Holmes said that they asked him, they said, "Hey, are you feeling good about Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch's injury recover?" And it's like, "Yeah, like I said, they're both headed in the right direction." So maybe that makes you feel good about that, and knowing that they've already brought some veterans in for that. And then the running back, I just thought they would take a late flyer on somebody just to add competition to that room. James, any thoughts on no safety, no tight end, no running back?
Yeah, it's interesting that they didn't bring in a running back as a rookie free agent yet either.
Oh
They've
yeah,
signed 9 guys and no running backs. They did bring in a tight end who I think is a guy who could potentially make it if they just decide to keep four. He could be a guy that gives them that extra tight end. If they go with Petzing's uh, habit of playing a lot of tight ends, but then they might not necessarily. So it is interesting though that in a draft where they had a lot of day three picks and day three was where the tight end value was that they didn't take one.
yeah, and I know there was a run on tight ends before they got to one of their picks, so that could have influenced it. But like you again, I thought it would have been a natural fit, but again, maybe the roster makeup. Coach, any thoughts on no safety, no tight end, no running back being taken in the
No,
draft?
I thought maybe they'd take a quarterback. The safety thing, as I said, I feel with them not taking a safety, that tells us that our injured guys are on the upswing and they're going to come back. I feared that they were going to take a safety, and then I was going to guess which one was going to be ready, or which one we may lose career-ending injury. So I
Yeah.
think that things. The other thing too is here, tight end wise, we have Conklin, Gordon, Horton, Laporta, and Wright all on contract right now.
Oh yeah, we got yep.
Forgot about Thomas Gordon. So I think that's another reason why they wouldn't take that. They were talking to one tight end, a free agent over. I was really hoping they were going to bring him in, but they didn't bring him in. So they brought another one in.
All right. Well, that other one, the one did get some other opportunities, so we'll be
Yes.
keeping an eye on him.
Yeah.
But you mentioned quarterback, undrafted free agents.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys the Lions did bring in was Luke Altmaier, quarterback out of Illinois. And they brought in about eight other guys. James, anybody jump out to you from this list that caught your eye?
Yeah, Altmaier was a guy who was supposed to be like a sixth or seventh round draft
Yeah.
pick. So was Lucas, the defensive end from USC, big defensive end. I think he's going to be a guy that they're going to give a long look to in training camp.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some pretty good pass rush juice, and he's a bit of a bigger defensive end. So I think that they'll look at him. Miles Kitselman, the tight end from Tennessee, another Tennessee guy, is a guy that could be in the mix if they decide to keep four tight ends. The big defensive tackle from Cal, who I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, Aiden. They gave him, he's 330 pound defensive end or defensive tackle, and they gave him $270,000 almost in guaranteed money in that undrafted
Yeah.
contract. So he's somebody that they're seriously looking at. It tells me that they kind of maybe view him as a Roy Lopez replacement as your backup defensive tackle behind Tyleek. And then you got Eric Hunter, a free safety or a linebacker out of Morgan State, who is another guy, and he's one of only a few guys from the HBCU colleges that got picked up, and they gave him a decent amount of guaranteed money as well, which tells me that they think that he's going to be a special teams demon and add to that linebacker unit. I mean, he ran a 4.45
Mm-hmm.
at his pro day at
Wow.
225 pounds.
Maybe they'll make him a running back. I'm just kidding.
Kick returner. How about that?
I
Grant
think we
Stewart
tried
2.0.
that. We got
We tried
excited
that.
about that idea and it backfired.
Yeah, but he's got a lot of potential. I think he's going to play a lot on
Awesome.
special teams. He loves playing special teams, but he's also got a lot of potential, I think, as a coverage linebacker down the road.
Mhm.
All right. And some of these guys could be great candidates for the practice squad that the Lions continue to develop up too, depending how it all goes. Coach, the Lions did not draft a quarterback, but they got Luke Altmaier. I mean, does that kind of check the box for you? And what's your breakdown on some of these guys that James just went over?
Altmaier's got a 3-year starter. The thing I've been reading up on him is his leadership. He commands the huddle. He commands the locker room. That's the stuff that I'm reading from the coaches and players and stuff out there that, no matter. And it sounded like even when he was I think a sophomore year he started, was redshirt sophomore. Anyways, he came in and commanded right away. So that leadership component of, yeah, there's some seniors on this. There's probably some 5th-year seniors. And today's day and age, there could be guys that have been there for 7 years. And he came in and commanded and said, this is my huddle. This is what we do. And, his stats, his numbers are awesome. I mean, so I think, this may be one of those, diamond in the rough guys that all of a sudden after a couple of years, 2, 3, hopefully not for 5 or 6 years, because Goff keeps doing what he's doing, but becomes that backup, the guy that we can turn to if something happens. And again, that D tackle, yeah, it was what I got here is 300,000 guaranteed, and the other one was 175. And when they're
Yep.
throwing that kind of guaranteed money on, that's what got them. That means they had many calls from many teams to
Yeah.
sign, and we just said, okay, they're giving you what? Well, we'll do 3. And so, but I think, there's another, to add to it. I can't remember the total number. I think we still have about 10 more spots. Does that sound right, you guys?
I
No,
think
to
it's at least
fill
5 or 6 on the 90 that they at least
690
got five or
now,
six spots
70.
left.
Yeah, it says 76 on the roster, and then if they added some more. But anyways, so I think that's the thing is they're bringing some of these guys in there that could play, and Kinselman, back to him. He's, of course, I immediately looked him up when I saw that he signed, and he's 260-pound tight end, so he's that big body tight end and played in a good program, and another one, maybe didn't run well or do what he's supposed to do well, but if he can block and protect the quarterback and then catch some passes here and there, we got Brock Wright's clone when Brock Wright is done. So it's good free agency for us too, I think.
All right. Well, after the draft, Brad, had day 3 presser. And guys, there were some very telling comments by Brad. There are some trends we've been talking about on the air and off the air. And let me just, uh, this is going to be an off season like we haven't seen from the Lions in a few years.
Yeah.
Brad Holmes on what was the most important thing about getting in this draft, and he said it was finding gritty football players, getting back to, he's like, I'm not saying we forgot about our identity, but making sure that was at the top of our mind, right? That's why every single player we took, there was some times where we were writing notes. This guy is a football player. And he goes back, he reads through the notes. So he's like, there's competitiveness in terms of climbing the depth chart. But he says, I do think that they're going to have the ability to potentially make some people uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And that means we're going to see training camp battles like we have not seen in the last 3 to 4 years, you guys.
Mhm.
Coach, what does that do for a team?
I think again, competition breeds winners. And when you get to the top of the peak or top of the staircase, and you start, this left tackle, we're going to have to develop him. Well, then nothing against Decker, but then Decker's like, well, I really don't have to. Not that Decker didn't work hard, but it's in the back of your mind. But when it's in the back of your mind now that dude's taking my spot, I could get cut. That's going to pick things up. I think that's the biggest thing without the joint practice. I think that's the biggest thing without the camps that we talked about, the mini camp pro days. I talked to a guy today about it. He said, what about the mini camp? They're not having that. And I said, well, the guys that come in to OTAs or get invited in, they better get their playbook down because there's no more baby steps. They're in the big thing. We're not on the pedestal anymore. We're on the bottom of the heap, and we have to climb and crawl our way back. And I think it's awesome. I think it's, again, that the timing, we talked about this a couple shows ago from a coaching standpoint is, hey, we got to spend when we're doing a joint practice or when we're doing a local pro day, we got to spend 2 or 3 a day or half a day preparing, getting stuff together and not focusing on us. And it's basically on us and the way I look at it, they're focusing on that person that's looking back in the mirror, and it's going to be an awesome camp and OTAs and should fare well into a great season.
Yeah, James, a number of things have been changed up. It wasn't just one thing. What are some of those changes, and what's your kind of impression?
Yeah, well, they're getting rid of the rookie mini camp, so we're not they're not having that this year. Like that's where they would bring in all kinds of guys for camp tryouts. And last year they kept one or two of them, and a couple of them made it pretty far into the regular training camp too. But so they got rid of that. They also canceled the local pro day this year, which was part of their evaluation. But the interesting part was they still drafted two local players. And then no joint practices. So they're going to change things up. They're going to make it so that things are a little different for the veterans even this year. And there's going to be some pretty good training camp battles because they've built in some depth with guys that they've signed. We mentioned wide receiver. You're going to have Dortch, Law, and Lovett going to be fighting for probably two spots between those three, maybe. Um, and then with Kennedy in there too. So if those safeties are looking better than what people think, I mean, they've got four other NFL safeties on the roster already, aside from those two starters. You're not going to keep six if those two are good to go. So there's going to be heck of some battles there in the secondary. They've built themselves some depth on the defensive line now. They've built themselves some depth at linebacker. There's going to be some pretty good training camp battles.
Yeah, and I do think switching things up for the veterans as well is huge. And it's not just the veterans. They're switching it for the coaching staff, for the scouting department. They want everyone to have to focus so you're not just going through the routines because coach, you're not trading a bunch of players and bringing a bunch of players in. You're not switching teams. You're wanting to take everybody and make something fresh and new without throwing everything out, but you want to make adjustments so that way the focus is stronger. And Brad Holmes talked about it. He wrote it on his mirror. Like they missed the playoffs. And missing the playoffs creates a different feeling than getting bounced in the first round, I have a feeling. And so you've gone through multiple seasons, you've seen the highs and the lows. How much can changing stuff like this impact a team?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, again, from a coaching standpoint, and again, I quote Lou Holtz all the time about create a crisis, but the competition part is huge. I mean, you get fat and sassy, or things are rolling along, or you have a great season, and you lose in the state finals. I'm talking, or you make the playoffs in college in the Division II, things like that. But you also have these, you got a 2 and 3 year starters that are coming back. And each year, let's talk college. Each year, you recruit a guy and you bring a guy in. You bring that guy in to push the guy that's in front of him. You bring that guy in there to say, "I'm going to take your spot." And I think last year we probably had a lot of position stuff where they weren't concerned or worried about somebody taking your spot. And they weren't concerned or worried about, yeah, some of the free agent guys that are on that roster are going, but the guys with the bigger contracts and stuff. And I don't think any of our all pros are sitting back going, well, I'm not worried because I think, the best guys work the hardest, but now every guy better work their hardest or they're going to be gone because they're like you said, and everybody said about Holmes is looking over, and he brought enough guys in or paid enough guys in free agency to push the envelope to say, we're going to keep that guy because he's the one that worked for 3 years at Lowe's or wherever trying to get to where he's at. And he's going to keep fighting to stay where he's at. So,
Yeah, and they had a lot of the roster turnover, and it wasn't. I mean, we saw some big names leave,
yeah,
but we saw people at all levels of the depth chart. switch out. So
Mhm.
it is going to be a very new look for the Lions. And I think this draft is the exclamation point on it before we head into training camp. Um, all right. Well, let's get into James. Anything else before we get to other draft thoughts?
Yeah, I think another position battle that's going to be good is the offensive line because I mean you've got I think
Well,
with Miller sliding into the to right tackle, you've got your starting offensive line pretty well set. Although I think Mahogany's going to have to hold some people off, but you've got a backups now of Borum, Frazier, Scruggs, and Barch, which means that guys that Holmes drafted like Sorsdal and Manu are probably on the outside looking in, or are going to have to outplay somebody to get a spot on this team.
Yeah, and even though I do think Miller is going to be penciled in as a starter, they're going to make him beat out
oh,
Borum. I
yeah.
mean, it's going to be a
Oh yeah.
competition, and it's going to be a good competition because, like I said before, we lost offensive tackle 2 and 3 from last year. I put Borum at 2.5, so he's going to be a solid contender to compete with rookie Miller there. But you're right. There's going to be a big battle across that offensive line. And what are we doing the math here? Ratledge is like the most likely person to be in the same spot from last year, and everybody else could be new. And if Mahogany's not there, then everything's new except for Ratledge, a second-year player.
Yeah, I think May's safe.
Yeah, but he's a new
Well,
guy.
but he's a
But
new guy.
yeah,
We're just saying new
no, I
spots.
know, I know, and I agree. I mean, that's the thing is in Borum is that he was brought in to start. He was brought in and said he can start. Yeah, they went out. So what is Borum sitting back going, oh my God, they brought me in, they paid me a pretty good thing, and now they just drafted a tackle. No, Borum's saying they brought me in to pay me to start, and let's go, Miller, because we're you and I are locked. We're head to head. But I think the thing is the culture within the Lions thing will be no matter who starts, that backup is going to be the one right there next because they know they're one play away from starting, and they know that they're only going to reach the pinnacle, the top by that competition and pushing each other. And then think about our swing tackle now, guys.
Yep,
Oh
exactly.
God. I mean, it's and I love Skip, but Skip's coaching him now. That's what so we got two Skips. I love that. So
That's great. Yeah, it is going to be a lot of fun, and there's a lot of optimism. The two picks that, well, I'll save that for my final thoughts. All
yeah.
right, other draft thoughts. I'm just going to say it, man. Too many commercials,
Oh,
especially in the first round. We were excited. Hey, instead of 10 minutes a pick, it's 8 minutes a
yeah.
pick. Bait and switch, ESPN. All right. They often went to commercial when the Lions were picking, even. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I mean, I'm a pretty positive person, but ESPN, do better, please. Like in the sixth round, Bettina Braga, the Detroit Lions International Fan of the Year from Sao Paulo, Brazil, she was making the pick. You had to watch, you had to look over the shoulder of the ESPN analyst
Yeah.
talking as she was making the pick. I was having problems with the NFL Network. I couldn't get that on at that point. I later did find it online, but I don't know, man. I was disappointed with the coverage on television. James, did you have any opinions, any thoughts?
I just didn't even bother with the coverage on television in day 2 and 3. I
Smart
listened to
move.
I listened to the radio, so I was in the car a lot on Saturday. So I just had ESPN radio and the NFL Network on
Yep.
XM, and I was just flipping back and forth between the two, whichever one wasn't a commercial. And a decent amount of time it worked out where the one was on commercial and the other one wasn't. So I was able to pretty well get a pretty good balance of being able to get information consistently the whole time there. So it was a lot better doing that, I think, than watching TV because the day 3 of the draft, I really love following, but the way they cover it, I just really do not care for. They just talk about. I'm imagining that ESPN that 50% of ESPN's talk was Garrett Nussmeier on day 3, right?
There's they're talking about the first round as well, and it was
Yeah.
just like, yeah, and so yeah, you're right. And so the coverage was what it was and whatnot. But I would have liked to see if you've got different people making the picks, show the picks. You know, the fans that are watching, the people that are still watching,
Mhm.
they want to see the people making the pick.
Yeah.
And I know the time's more crunch then. But the first round, it just felt like they treated it like it was the third round with all the commercials they went to this year. Fortunately, we had some good company in that first round at Coach's party. But Coach, what are your thoughts on the production coverage of it
Yeah,
all?
the same thing. I saw a ton of that. This. It did. It got to a point. I'll just tell you, the worst thing is driving home from a track meet when you're trying to listen to it through your Hulu channel on your phone, and all your friends are texting the picks, and you're getting phone calls. So I was like 9 picks behind everything. So, but
Streaming. Yep.
yeah, oh, so it's all good. So, but yeah, I totally agree. I think maybe they know when a special somebody's coming up to make a pick for a team and focus on that. So, but it's all about the mighty dollar.
All right. Well, speaking of that, let's talk about the mighty population, the draft location,
Go on.
and turnout. Um, it- Pittsburgh has a new record. They set the record that they broke the record for fan attendance. I think it was 805,000 is what they hit. They eclipsed the Lions from 775,000 or Detroit, 775,000 2 years ago. Guys, I said I didn't think it would happen, but in hindsight, I think I know why it happened. And James, you were there. You can tell me I don't think the venue in Detroit was big enough. I don't think enough people could get in. Where in Pittsburgh, it looked pretty darn spacious, even on night one there. There was lots of room. And James, I mean, I was there on day three and there was lots of room, but you were there day one in Detroit. Coach, were you there day one as well?
Yep, I was
And,
there
and like,
all weekend.
you guys tell me about your experience here because I thought I heard like they closed off the gates at some point that people couldn't even get in because capacity had been reached.
Yeah, they did at one point, and there was one point where they blocked off places inside when people were inside. We had gone at one point to go get food, so we were in the food court area, and then they cordoned that off, and basically we were saying no, you can't go back into the draft part of it. And then after a while, and some pretty insistent people uh, threatening to rush the police on horses that they eventually let people through.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we got back in time to see the Lions pick and everything. But you were packed like sardines even when you were in the venue because it was narrower. Like you said, when you saw those big when they panned out in Pittsburgh, they made it wider. It was more of an open space, I think.
Coach, same experience that
Yeah,
James had?
same thing. I mean, it was an hour and 20 minutes before the draft started in Detroit, and they closed it. No more, no more, nobody else could come in. And we had that private party just down the road. So, but that whole area, which was we were probably 3/4 of a mile away, that whole area was packed just like just like inside the venue. So I think they raised it. I don't think they beat Detroit. I'm sorry. They just
Well, and they also said if the same person goes in each day or whatever, it counts.
yeah.
And so I'm just gonna say I think Detroit, if they didn't make the venue big enough
No.
because if you saw, I mean, everybody saw that scene when they drafted Terry and Arnold, and James, you're in the middle of that roar that
Yeah.
went out when the Lions traded up. Like there, it was like sardines, like you said.
Mhm.
It did not feel like that in Pittsburgh. So I know the popularity of the NFL continues to grow. I'm sure that played into it. I'm just gonna say. I don't think the NFL was prepared for what happened in Detroit
Right.
because they're like, oh, Nashville, 600,000 like 5 years ago. Maybe we'll come near that. They weren't ready. So, all right, draft will be in Washington, D.C. next year. We'll see what that means. You've got a couple big cities, D.C. and Baltimore. But I'm going to tell you from my time going to college on the East Coast, uh, it could be a little different. Some sports towns in different places can vary. And it depends how many are close enough to it to travel there versus what we have in some of these Midwest towns where you got two, three, four of them surrounding it. So,
Hmm.
all
Well, the
right.
NFL, the NFL should count all the people they turned away in Detroit, and then it wouldn't be close.
There you go. I like that one. Um, all right, one more retrospect here on the draft, little PTSD maybe. Roy Lopez announced the pick for Arizona. That didn't hurt me too much because I know I like Roy Lopez. I was fine with him being here, happy he was here, and understood why he went back. But did you really have to bring Matt Millen back up on stage? I mean, it felt like it was when they let him announce all those Michigan games after he was done being with I remember covering a Michigan game and seeing him up in the press box, and I was like, that's Matt Millen, man. And he got booed a lot of times whenever he was in Ann Arbor covering those games. But all right, let's move on. Final thoughts here. Coach, we'll start with you. Any final thoughts on the whole draft? Anything we've touched on or anything we haven't hit on?
Yeah, I think we filled the needs that we needed, and those holes, and really looking forward to those training camps.
All right, James, how about you?
At least Matt Millen wasn't announcing Lions picks
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
making them.
Or making them. Yeah. I mean, can you still picture him and Joey Harrington next to each other with the jersey? Um, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to end on a more positive note than that. We have a better mental picture to leave out, and that's going to be the Lions hit their first two picks out of the park with those needs, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They hit the needs they needed to, they hit the areas we wanted them to do. And we'll see how those players develop and what becomes of them. But they appear to be very solid picks. And it looks like they brought in solid competition down the line after that. So I don't have concerns. I think they hit what we needed them to do, and we'll just have to see how it goes from there. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you think about the draft? Did it go the way you wanted? Is there something you were hoping would go a little bit differently? Tell your friends and family about the show while you're at it. We definitely appreciate your support. You can find us on social media. Check out more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.